This is actually my grandpa's story. He's been gone a long time now, but he always used to tell us the same story as kids. I remember it vividly because he'd tell it so often. No matter what time of year, whether it was around the Christmas dinner table or having a backyard camp out, he always brought up this story. I think it really actually kind of scared him. Have you ever watched Late Night Animal Planet? That's when all the really weird shows come on, about alien abductions and wolfmen and all of that made-up stuff. Grandpa didn't think it was made up. If we were watching Animal Planet and 9 p.m. rolled around, he always made us shut it off. I think it's because it reminded him of what he thought he saw. I always told him that he should really write into those shows and tell his story. He said he didn't want to. He said he knew that those stories were fake because the ghost hunters never actually ever found a ghost. He said that he knew that his story was real and he didn't want to get lumped in with all those pretenders. So, here's the story. My grandpa was a logger up in the Pacific Northwest. He was actually right around Olympic National Park, which is way out on the Olympic Peninsula. It's extremely rugged terrain but full of excellent timber. He worked for a relatively small logging company at the time, but they had managed to sign a lease with the Forest Service to cut lumber from the region. It was really hard work. They didn't have chainsaws or great machinery back in those days. They relied mostly on their own strength and teams of horses to get the massive trees they felled out of the woods and to the nearest railroad station. From there, the logs would get transported to a mill, sawn into planks and shipped off to be turned into houses or whatever. My grandpa said that they always set up a pretty big camp. They had a team of several dozen guys, and they all slept in tents and had big fires at night. It was the only way to try and stay warm and dry in that rainy climate. The camp is important because it's really where all the action takes place. My grandpa said that they had just moved spots and set up a new camp. He said that this camp was pretty deep in the forest, but they chose it because of how close it was to a river. They planned to float the timber down the river rather than haul it out with horses. He said they were all pretty excited about this fact. They were in good spirits because it would mean a little less work for them. He said they got pretty loud as they started clearing trees that first day at the new camp, singing songs and laughing. He also said they made a huge bonfire out of debris and all got pretty drunk that night and went to sleep. He said he woke up abruptly in the middle of the night. He actually said that every man in camp did because something huge was moving through the tents and making a whole lot of noise. He could hear footsteps, huge sounding footsteps, crunching the twigs and pine cones with every step. He said the sound that it made was absolutely indescribable, like a really deep grunting and heavy breathing, like how you'd sound after you'd been sprinting as fast as possible up 5 flights of stairs. He said that every few moments, this heavy breathing would get broken up by a long, hollow bellow sound that would climax in a series of ringing hoots. He said it was absolutely ear-splitting. He himself didn't carry a weapon when he was out logging because it was just another heavy item to lug from camp to camp. One of the members of his team did, though, and he always said that he was thankful for that. One of the other loggers had a hunting rifle. Every so often, he'd head off and try to take down one of the Roosevelt elk in the region. The hunting rifle went off after my grandpa woke up, presumably aimed at whatever was in their camp. My grandpa said that the creature went berserk after that and tried to destroy their camp. It knocked over several supply tents and even ripped apart one of the carts they'd used to haul their gear in. The destruction was evident in the morning light. He didn't ever really know why the creature left, but it left without hurting anyone. Maybe it was all just intended to be a warning. He hypothesized that maybe they had gone too deep into the forest in search of good lumber or a good location. He thought that maybe they'd disturbed the creature's home by cutting down the trees. He also wondered if maybe their partying and drinking that night had attracted it to them. Maybe they would have been safe if they had all just quietly gone to bed. My grandpa remained a logger for a decade after that, but he said that was the only encounter he ever had with whatever that thing was. He said that he was always on the lookout for it. It makes sense to me that he could never stand me watching the TV shows about strange encounters. He'd had one of his own, and probably didn't want to relive it like that. He liked telling the story. but maybe that's just because he was able to control what happened in it. As a Yellowstone National Park ranger, I was often out on routine hikes as part of my job duties. These hikes were meant to help me familiarize myself with the park's trails and to keep an eye out for any potential hazards or issues that might need to be addressed. It was also an opportunity for me to observe and interact with the park's wildlife, as well as to educate visitors about the importance of preserving and protecting the natural environment. On this particular day, I was out on a routine hike because it was part of my regular patrol schedule. I was walking along a narrow trail that led through a dense forest when I heard a rustling in the underbrush. I stopped in my tracks and listened carefully, trying to determine what was causing the noise. It sounded like it was getting closer, so I slowly reached for my bear spray, just in case. Suddenly, a massive creature burst out of the trees and onto the trail in front of me. It was a wolf, but unlike any wolf I had ever seen before. The wolf was standing on two legs like a human and towering over me. It had dark brown fur that shone in the sunlight, and its eyes were piercing and intelligent. Its jaws were strong and powerful, filled with sharp teeth. Its claws were extended, ready to attack, and it seemed to be sizing me up as if it was trying to decide whether or not to attack. Overall, the wolf had an intimidating and aggressive presence, and I could tell that it was a formidable predator. I froze, unsure of what to do. The wolf seemed to be sizing me up. Its eyes narrowed and its lips pulled back in a snarl. It was clearly agitated, and I could see that it was ready to attack. I slowly backed away, trying to keep my distance from the wolf. But it was no use. The wolf was too fast. It lunged at me, its sharp teeth and its claws extended. I tried to fend it off with my bear spray, but the wolf was too strong. It knocked me to the ground and began to bite and claw at me, determined to bring me down. I fought for my life, trying to escape from the wolf's grasp. But it was no use. The wolf was too powerful. I was certain that it was going to kill me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Just when I thought it was all over, the wolf suddenly stopped attacking. It looked at me with its piercing gaze, then turned and ran off into the forest, disappearing into the trees. I lay there on the ground, battered and bruised, but somehow alive. It was a miracle that I had survived the encounter with that aggressive, intimidating wolf, and I knew that I would never forget it. I was eventually rescued by a team of rangers and rushed to the hospital where I was treated for my injuries. The bite marks were deep and numerous, and it was clear that I had been attacked by a large predatory animal. But when I tried to tell the authorities about the strange bipedal wolf that had attacked me, they dismissed my claims and insisted that it must have been a gray wolf. They even went so far as to cover up the incident, pretending that it had never happened. I knew that what I had seen was real, and that the authorities were just trying to protect the reputation of the park. But I also knew that I couldn't prove it, and that I would have to live with the memory of that terrifying encounter for the rest of my life. I have thought about that moment many times since that day, and I have a few theories about why the wolf might have stopped attacking me. One possibility is that the wolf simply lost interest in attacking me. It may have been agitated or provoked by something else, and my presence may have simply been a coincidence. Once it had satisfied its aggression, it may have simply lost interest in me and decided to move on. Another possibility is that the wolf was startled by something else. It may have heard or seen something that caused it to become distracted or frightened, and it may have decided to run away rather than continuing to attack me. Ultimately, I will never know for certain why the wolf stopped attacking. It was an extraordinary and unexpected moment, and one that I will always remember. This is an old story, but my family has me tell it almost every year. Some believe me and some don't. There was a period of time back in the late 90s where I was the property manager for a building in downtown Houston. It was one of those places where different businesses or whatever would rent out floors or suites as their headquarters. My job was basically to be on hand to keep tabs on the cleaning staff and generally be the go-between between any of the renters and the owners. The place did really well overall, but they notoriously couldn't keep tenants on the 4th floor. I wish I could say something cooler like it was the 13th floor that was cursed, but this place only had 9 floors, so what can you do? I'm here to tell you what happened, not what fits the stereotype. We were coming into the fall, and yet again some jerk had broken their lease on floor 4 and moved out early. They had to be out by the 15th, and it was my job to make sure they adhered to the agreement. Anytime they stayed behind or left things killed our turnover in trying to get a new tenant for the top of the next month. To make things even better, we were just coming out of a spell where one of our cleaning guys would forget to pull the door shut after sneaking a smoke out back. That, plus downtown Houston in the 90s, meant I was forever chasing teenagers out of the place. It was a treat. One night the janitors were done, and I'd made my rounds before locking up for the night. I crossed the parking lot to the far end where my car was and just happened to look up from my keys to see a light on. On the 4th floor, of course. Now, I might have uttered some words it's not very nice to repeat, but after several nights that month running folks out of the place, I was in no mood for this kind of thing, especially as I'd already made my rounds, and this was just dragging me back inside. Regardless, I was going to have to deal with it. So back in I go and take the elevator up. If I was doing my due diligence, I would have gone all the way to the top and worked my way down again to make sure nobody was on the upper floors, but I was in no mood. Besides, the lights were up on 4, so 4 was where I was going. When I got there, everything was bright, but nobody seemed to be around. Now, to set the scene a bit, the renters that left took all the furniture, but the phones and cubicle dividers belonged to the building. As such, there were still some set up here or there, but most were stacked against the walls. The creepy part in hindsight was that all the phones were on the floors, right where they had been set when taken off the desks. You could see the whole layout of their office structure just by where the phones were on the carpets. Anyway, I go from office to office, making as much noise as possible to flush out whoever was monkeying around. Office after office, no dice. Nobody in sight. On other nights, I might have gone through the whole building again, but I refer you to my former statement of being in no mood. After establishing the floor was clear, I just kicked off the lights and made my way back to the elevator. I'd hit the button and stood there, fuming. Then, all in a second, I knew I wasn't alone up there. I turned around and saw a man walk out of the corner office at the far end. He was dressed like something out of a 1950s newspaper movie or Mad Men. Suit, tie, and a fedora. He saunters to the dead center of the room opposite me and turns to stop. That's my cue to start yelling every name in the book at this guy. I start for him in a full-on huff, and he just does this kind of lazy walk towards me. Something about how calm he is only makes me angrier. I've crossed maybe a quarter of the room when something in my lizard brain starts telling me that something isn't right. All the lights have been cut off, but he steps into a beam spilling up from the lights in the parking lot, and that's when it all comes into place. He's got no face. I immediately start walking backwards because there's no way I'm turning back on this, whatever it is. The elevator opened and closed while I was yelling at this guy, and I reached back to hit the button, praying like hell it hasn't gone back down to the lobby. He keeps getting closer, and just when he's about 15 feet from me, every phone in the place starts ringing, even the ones that aren't plugged in. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. The doors behind me open, and I just step backwards into the light of the elevator and hit the close doors button. The guy approaching hasn't changed his pace at all, and the doors close just as his nothing face reaches the threshold. I book across the lobby, lock the doors up, and dive into my car. We secured a tenant within the next few days, and they moved in almost entirely by the 25th. I have no idea if they stayed on long term, as I handed in my resignation before the end of the next month. Most people don't believe me, but it happened 2 years ago. I'm a pretty heavy outdoorsman, hunting, fishing, hiking, the whole 9 yards. I even do some real niche activities too, like snake hunting. I haven't met too many other snake hunters. Most people don't even know it's a thing you can do. Where I'm from, you can catch timber rattlesnakes if they are at least 2 feet long. Calling it hunting might be misleading. It's more like a scavenger hunt. I go out with a hollow plastic tube that has a mark at the 2-foot line and a pair of snake tongs. To put it simply, I grab the snake in the tongs, pop it into the tube, and if it's past the 2-foot mark, I get to keep it and make a belt out of it. The best place to find rattlers is in rock piles. Timber rattlesnakes are not as aggressive as their more famous western cousins. They are very shy, so if you want to catch them, you have to be real sneaky and grab them when they are basking in the sun on rock knolls. The trick is to know which rock piles get sun exposure at which points in the day so you can skulk around them and hopefully get lucky. I was stalking all my usual knolls when things started getting weird. This was all on public land, a state forest. I'm not going to say which one because I don't want internet yahoos traipsing around my backyard and getting themselves killed looking for what I encountered. When I got to my first rock pile, everything was silent. No birds, no bugs, no nothing. Then, as if a gun went off to start a race, 3 sizable rattlers came out of the rocks and hauled ass downhill. I had never seen snakes act like that before. They usually bury themselves deeper when threatened, but I didn't think I was loud enough to spook them either way. I picked my way down the trail in the direction the snakes went. I was careful where I stepped because I didn't want to come up on the snakes unprepared. I'm a crazy, not stupid. Well, not that stupid. The trail took me up a ridge and down into an open valley with a creek running along the bottom. The creek was split into a fork by a large rock formation in the center. I stopped in my tracks when I saw at least a dozen rattlesnakes perched on the rocks. It was an absolute gold mine, but I was nervous about how I would approach that many snakes. Like I said, timber rattlers are less aggressive than other species, but that doesn't mean I want to get stuck in the middle of a crowd of them. I waded into the creek and slowly approached the rocks. I was more concerned with being quiet than visible. I'm pretty sure snakes have crap eyesight. At least that's what I've always heard. I wasn't planning on being greedy. I just wanted to grab the nearest snake and maybe snap a picture or two of the snake party for my buddies, but then all the snakes lifted their heads in unison and glared at something behind me. Rattles and hisses were all I could hear. I wanted to look behind me, but I was also afraid of turning my back on a batch of irritated rattlesnakes. The sounds of splashing became close enough that I knew whatever the snakes were hissing at was right behind me. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. All the snakes suddenly became quiet. Everything was silent except for the short, snorting breaths of the thing behind me taking in my scent. When I was finally man enough to turn around, I got the shock of my life. I was prepared for a bear or a hog. Both of those would have been scary enough. But what I saw looking back at me was horrifying. Yellow eyes with black pupils looked down on me with curiosity. Its skin was grayish-green and covered in rough scales like an alligator. The snout was lizard-like and filled with pointed teeth. The reptile thing towered over me, easily 8 feet tall. Huge black claws were on the ends of both hands, and they slowly reached for me. I panicked and flung my snake tongs and tube at the reptilian and dove deeper into the creek. I half swam, half ran in the waist-deep water until I got to the bank and sprinted up the ridge to the path. I ran down the path until my legs burned. I was back near the first rock pile where this whole mess started. I hid inside a divot in the rocks that made a crawl space-sized cave. I could hear the creature sniffing the air. It casually followed my trail. A black clawed foot stepped into the space in front of my hiding spot. I could barely fit into the space, so I knew the creature didn't have much of a chance to get me. It stood there at the mouth of the opening, sniffing and lapping the air with its tongue. The creature kept me there for hours. I even got a picture of its foot. I started to lose it. All I could think about was the scene from Jurassic Park when the raptors stalked the kids through the park. I wanted to laugh and cry all at once. Eventually, it just walked off. I stayed in the place for hours afterwards until I heard the voice of my partner and oldest son calling my name. They were worried and had come looking for me. I sprinted out of that hole and got them out of the woods as fast as I could. I was not about to risk my family running into that creature. When I got home, I hoped I was just crazy, and I wished I didn't have that picture I took. Then maybe I could tell myself I lost my mind for an afternoon. I can't stop thinking about what else might be out there. I have always been skeptical of people who claim to have seen extraterrestrial things. So when I had this sighting and it made me feel so excited, I felt kind of foolish. I was not expecting it at all. I know there are some people who are looking for these kinds of experiences and actually take steps to search them out. But I think it's more likely to happen when you're totally not thinking about it. I never even mentioned it to my boss or coworkers. I didn't want to be labeled as a kook. The state park I work for is really one of the most beautiful places I have ever been. It has a nice mix of beaches and trails, and you couldn't ask for a better environment to work in. It's the Emerald Bay State Park in Lake Tahoe. I don't even know if I should say the name. I wonder if that makes people flock to the area. This place already does get really crowded. I've been a park ranger for quite a few years, and this is the busiest place I have ever worked. This experience happened in 2019. I spent some summers out here with my family when I was a kid. My dad really liked to rent a boat and hang out on the water all day. So I've loved this place for a long time. We would kind of alternate between here and Lake Havasu for our summer vacations. I never thought I would end up employed here, though. During summer holidays, the place can be a madhouse. I was on duty on the 4th of July that year, and it was a real crazy day with all those people. After my shift, I decided to go up to Inspiration Point to take in the fireworks show. Lake Tahoe puts on one of the best shows in the country, if you ask me. I got myself some snacks and found myself a good spot to relax. I knew all the secret little areas, so I wasn't near any people. The show started off as usual and was fabulous. About halfway into it, I was looking off to the west a bit, and I saw several orange orbs start to float up toward the sky. I remember thinking something like, those must be some of those Chinese lanterns. Then as I was watching them, I thought maybe they were embers from the fireworks or something. But they were incredibly bright, so that didn't really make sense since embers would be fading. They floated up and seemed to form into kind of a W shape. They started to look like they were remote-controlled or something. At first, they had looked like bright orange lights, but once they were up high, they looked brighter and whiter and started moving around. Then they kept going higher and started looking like stars. They obviously weren't embers. But then, sort of out of the middle of that W shape, there was this craft, or whatever you want to call it, that zoomed down lower and flew over my head. It was too fast for my eyes to really catch what shape it was, like as fast as a bullet. It was still pretty high up there, but the lights on it were brighter than anything I've seen. And right after it passed over, there were like little twinkles of light all in the sky right over my head. Like right over my head, not over the lake where the show was happening. The twinkles of light started making these incredible light streaks. I was beside myself. It wasn't like any technology I had seen before. It sounds a little crazy that I had noticed this stuff while that amazing show was going on. Maybe it was because I was used to scanning the sky almost every night. The lights were behaving in a strange fashion. I can't quite explain it, but somehow those twinkles of light suddenly burst into dozens of lights in the sky. All of a sudden, they were moving together like some kind of squadron or something. It made me feel kind of anxious, but for some reason I was also filled with this strange exhilaration. I just sat there in amazement, unable to comprehend what I was seeing, but knowing it wasn't normal. You could see the stars steady behind them as they were moving across. Then, the dozens of lights came together and went into a triangle formation, whereas before, they were just individually flying forward. Once they formed the triangle, I noticed that they were flying left to right, up and down. It was really surreal to have this amazing fireworks show going on, and there I was completely ignoring it and watching this inexplicable sideshow. It wasn't that high in the sky, but not unnaturally low either. But eventually the triangle seemed to just start ascending higher and higher until I couldn't see the lights anymore. I have never seen anything like what I saw that night before. For the next few months I kept watching the sky, trying to notice anything strange. But I never saw anything on that grand of a scale again. I'm sure people must have thought that what I was seeing was part of the show, But it absolutely was not that. I know there's some military activity not too far from here, so I don't know if it could have been connected to some testing or something, but I really don't think so.